Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Monday, the 8th of December. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast here on ARIRANG TV. Thanks ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. The International Olympic Committee says it could allow Korea's alpine town of PyeongChang to change venues for its 2018 Olympic events. If it takes the IOC up on the offer, it could help PyeongChang reduce costs and avoid unnecessary spending. Dozens are arrested in the United States as protests condemning police brutality continue in major U.S. cities with no end in sight. Plus, torrential rain and high winds are still sweeping across the central Philippines as a powerful typhoon moves slowly across the islands. And we start with news that PyeongChang, the host city for the 2018 Winter Olympics, is going to be offered the opportunity to share some of the burden of holding this global sporting event with other cities outside of Korea. The final decision will rest with PyeongChang's organizing committee. The International Olympic Committee's move is part of reforms aimed at cutting the costs for host cities. Song Ji-son reports.
It took PyeongChang 3 attempts to win the rights to host the Winter Olympics. But when the flame is lit and the games get underway in February 2018, some of the events could be taking place elsewhere. The International Olympic Committee has offered a PyeongChang organizing committee the chance to host some of the events in other countries. The decision will be PyeongChang's to make, though. The IOC's Coordination Commissioner Gunilla Lindberg told AP that PyeongChang gets the final say on whether the games stay within the city or whether it takes the opportunity to host some events elsewhere. These proposals are part of the IOC President Thomas Bach's package of reforms dubbed Agenda 2020. The agenda is part of the IOC's bid to change the Olympic Games to better adapt in the changing world for financial and sustainability reasons. According to the IOC, hosting sledding events in pre-existing venues would save PyeongChang $120 million in construction costs and up to $5 million a year in maintenance. After voting on Agenda 2020 on Monday and Tuesday, the IOC will hand over a list of potential cities to the PyeongChang Organizing Committee, which has until March to make its decision. The candidates include Nagano in Japan and Salt Lake City in the U.S., as well as 10 other sites in Europe, America, and Asia. PyeongChang organizers are set to be looking at all available options, but say long-term plans have been drawn up for the venues and construction has already begun. Song Ji-son, ARIRANG News.
Now, from Dokdo Island and Japan's refusal to make amends for wartime atrocities to holding North Korea responsible for its provocations, U.S. Congressman Ed Royce was asked to weigh in on a number of very controversial issues central to South Korea. In a recent interview, his answers demonstrate quite clearly where his loyalties lie. Shin Se-min reports.
An 11-term U.S. lawmaker is making clear where he stands on a number of issues that have placed South Korea at odds with neighbors. In a wide-ranging interview with Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency, Congressman Ed Royce, who is chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, said that understanding the past is key to understanding the present. On the issue of Dokdo Island, Royce openly rejected Japan's claim to the Korean territory and said its proper name is Dokdo, not the Liancourt Rocks as the U.S. officially refers to it, and not Takeshima, which is what Japan calls it. It's a rare assertion since the U.S. government takes no official position on the issue. Royce also slammed Tokyo for repeatedly declining to take responsibility for forcing women into sexual slavery before and during World War II. Calling it as horrifying as denying the Holocaust, Royce said Japan needed to admit history as it occurred to make for a better future. Regarding North Korea, Royce said he has introduced legislation that calls for stronger financial sanctions on the regime. The North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act passed the House earlier this year and currently awaits approval by the Senate, although passage is unlikely in this current Congress. If the bill doesn't pass, Royce said he would reintroduce it once the new Congress comes in. In the meantime, the veteran lawmaker said Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo needed to work more closely with one another to maintain pressure on North Korea over its human rights violations and repeated provocations. 신세민, 아리랑 뉴스.
The South Korean government will attempt to seek a more flexible and open stance in its negotiations with North Korea as it looks to build on President Park Geun-hye's North Korea policy as she enters her third year in office next year. Seoul's Unification Ministry says it's regretful inter-Korean relations have stalled and it's time to seek practical and realistic ways to boost ties. Ministry officials say they are considering a broad package of talks on topics including the resumption of reunions for families separated since the Korean War and reopening tours to North Korea's Mount Kumgang resort. But there is a condition to these talks happening. Seoul says North Korea has to apologize for its torpedoing of the South Korean warship Cheonan back in 2010. North Korea says it was not behind the recent cyber attack on Sony Pictures that many thought was Pyongyang's way of retaliating for an upcoming comedy movie that depicts two Americans planning to assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. While denying responsibility, the North's National Defense Commission said the hack might be a righteous deed of the supporters and sympathizers of the North. It also suggested the hack may have been South Korea, who it said linked the attack to North Korea without any shred of evidence. Last week's cyber attack completely paralyzed Sony Pictures' computer systems and leaked a handful of previously unreleased films onto the internet where they could be illegally downloaded. Now, the film that sparked the controversy is what you can see here. The Interview is due to be released in the United States later this month. Now, negotiations for a regional free trade agreement for 12 countries known as TPP or Trans-Pacific Partnership have resumed in Washington. The six-day working level meeting, which started on Sunday local time, follows last month's APEC summit in Beijing, in which leaders reaffirmed their will to conclude an agreement as early as next year. The TPP countries are expected to discuss outstanding issues such as intellectual property and reform of state-owned firms to establish fair business competition in areas where developed and emerging economies have been at odds over the years. Now, this Pacific FTA involves Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, the United States and Vietnam. South Korea, which is not represented at these talks in Washington, announced its interest, though, in participating in TPP in November last year. Over in the US, some protests continue in several major cities there for the fourth night running against a recent spate of police confrontations that ended with the deaths of unarmed black men. Demonstrations which began peacefully turned violent in some areas, with some protesters throwing rocks and bottles at police officers. Our Song Jong-in reports.
Thousands of demonstrators took to the streets of major U.S. cities over the weekend. The mostly peaceful marches were part of the ongoing protests held since the announcement last Wednesday of a grand jury's decision not to indict a white police officer in the chokehold death of an unarmed black man, Eric Garner. The decision closely followed recent cases of police avoiding prosecution after being implicated in the deaths of African-American men. In New York, protesters chanted slogans like "I can't breathe," the last word spoken by Garner, while others staged a symbolic die-in by lying down on the floor of Grand Central Terminal. While the majority of the gatherings passed by peacefully, some protests, including ones in Berkeley and Seattle, were marred with violence. Some protesters split off from the main crowd to smash windows and pelt police with rocks and bottles, leaving some officers with minor injuries. Demonstrations were also held in Philadelphia, Chicago, Miami, Las Vegas, and a number of other smaller cities. Protesters are demanding a fair execution of the law, regardless of race. Meanwhile, Eric Garner's family, who joined civil rights activist Al Sharpton at the site on Staten Island where Garner died in July, thanked protesters across the country. Sharpton also announced plans to organize more rallies in the near future and to press for change at the federal level. 손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, we are watching the strongest storm to hit the Philippines since last year's Typhoon Haiyan completely devastated large parts of that nation. For the latest, we're going to check in with Eunice Kim at the News Centre. So, Eunice, it appears damage is much less than last time around, thanks in large part to lessons learned from last year's devastation.
Right, there was a massive evacuation operation and, of course, the memory of last year's monstrous storm Typhoon Haiyan that had killed thousands mobilized people to take cover this year. Typhoon Hagupit is slowly making its way out of the Philippines this hour as the more than 1 million evacuated residents in the central area of the country emerged to survey the damage this morning. The typhoon made landfall on Saturday, packing winds of up to 175 kilometers per hour. It knocked out power and phone lines and flattened homes as heavy rainfall and winds pounded an area near the region ravaged by last year's Typhoon Haiyan. The country's Interior Ministry said at least 3 people died in this year's strongest storm to date, including a baby girl of hypothermia.
And Eunice, we must say, of course, that it's not over yet. This storm is moving at a relative snail's pace, and we understand that while it is significantly weaker, it's now making its way towards the very densely populated capital, Manila.
Sure, the National Disaster Agency in the Philippines had said last night the eye of Hagupit was forecast to pass its closest point to Manila later tonight as it moves northwest, but the outer bands appear to already be affecting the capital, dropping heavy rains in the area. There are also, of course, lingering concerns of landslides and flash floods in the storm's aftermath. Relatedly, Seoul's foreign ministry issued a travel warning to the Philippines. Korea's government said it was also discussing a humanitarian aid package to send to the country.
And Eunice, let's turn our attention now to India. There's a very popular smartphone application out there. It's a cab service called Uber, but it's in hot water again. This after one of its drivers was arrested in India on charges of rape.
Right, more trouble for Uber, which had been gaining some traction in the world's second most popular country, of course, that's India, where protests have already erupted over this latest controversy. A female client who used the service late Friday night said the driver of her cab had sexually assaulted and beaten her in a secluded part of Delhi. The 26-year-old said she was headed home from a social event and had fallen asleep when she was raped. Fast thinking led her to take down the driver's number and photograph his car as he dropped her off near her home. That car, authorities say, was discovered abandoned by the 32-year-old driver. Now, Uber has said it suspended that driver following the allegations and that it is cooperating with the investigations, but police in India say they were considering taking legal action against the U.S. company for failing to check the driver's criminal background, and also the car apparently did not have a GPS location device.
Yes, well, Eunice, this is yet another unfortunate incident to hit this cab company that has had a lot of controversies in the past. And we'll keep our viewers updated on this story as we get developments. And thank you, Eunice, and we'll see you again at noon.
See you then.
Said that a team of South Korea.
Get connected to Korea and the world. Join us every weekday for the latest developments out of Korea, Asia, and beyond. On air, on your mobile, and online, we lead the way every day. ARIRANG News.
To try and resolve the crisis in Ukraine, the European Union also offers 15 billion. Now, back here in Korea, and as hard as they try, government measures to boost the economy are not taking hold as quickly as many people would like. And heading into next year, the strategy is going to centre around 2 objectives, namely fueling domestic demand and reforming the labour market. Park Ji-won reports.
Revitalizing the domestic market and carrying out structural reforms of the labor market. These are 2 pillars of the government's economic initiative next year as it tries to build momentum toward growth. First, the expansion of the domestic market. The government aims to achieve an economic growth rate in the 4% range next year and has realized that a supplementary budget alone won't be enough to get the job done. So the plan now calls for inducing more large-scale investments from the private sector next year by streamlining the complicated process of the private investment and lowering thresholds for private investments. For example, the government hopes to attract private investment to areas where only the government can invest, such as prisons. However, due to resistance from the opposition, it remains to be seen whether the plans will be realized. Increasing labor market flexibility is another pillar of next year's goal, specifically reducing the number of temporary jobs and reforming the regular job system. About 1/3 of all current workers are employed on a temporary basis. This means their salaries are lower and they are placed in more vulnerable working conditions than their regular counterparts. To get the private sector to transition more temporary employees into regular positions, it hopes to reform the rigid salary systems, especially for high-paid regular workers. However, experts stress that securing enough of a social safety net for the jobless, such as extending unemployment benefits and providing more job training, should also be a priority so as not to decrease domestic consumption. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The number of elderly Koreans living in poverty is rising at a very troubling rate. The Korea Economic Research Institute says the number of elderly households living below the poverty line came to a staggering 1.5 million last year, which is more than double the total of less than 10 years ago, back in 2006. And you might be wondering what their average income is each month. Well, it's a paltry $342. And at least 60% of that comes from subsidies handed out by the government and non-profits. The report noted that welfare policies for the elderly needed to focus more on providing financial support rather than trying to put them into work. The average age of an elderly Korean citizen living in poverty last year was 78. Now, the K-pop craze is powered by a steady stream of Korean music, but the entertainment agencies responsible for creating some of the biggest names in the industry are now looking to emulate that success in the music field in other areas, from fashion and cosmetics to even a travel agency. Our Connie Kim takes a look at their most recent pursuits in this week's Industry Insight.
Big Bang, Girls' Generation, Super Junior. There are few K-pop stars who have taken the world by storm, capped off, of course, by Psy and his YouTube hit Gangnam Style. Behind every great act in Korea is an entertainment agency that cultivates and promotes them. And leading the pack is YG Entertainment, one of the powerhouses driving the so-called Hallyu, or Korean wave. Founded in 1996, it created a success formula with idol groups like Big Bang and 21, and went public on Korea's tech-heavy Kosdaq stock market 3 years ago. YG now boasts annual revenue of some $104 million, more than 250 employees, and more than 20 artists under its belt. On the back of their success, entertainment giants are now branching out to other businesses. In September, YG launched apparel brand Nonigan, using its fashionable artists who influence fans all over the world to market it. Through pop-up stores in Italy, Hong Kong, and China, it aims to rake in $90 million by 2017.
I've always thought that fashion and music go in line together. When we think of Big Bang and 21, we think of their songs, but behind their performances, it's their styling and fashion that makes them a whole.
It even jumped on the popularity of Korean cosmetics with its own line, Moonshot, targeting K-pop fans with Asian facial features. Recognizing YG's growth potential, French luxury goods giant LVMH has announced it'll invest up to $80 million in the company. While YG may be at the top right now when it comes to branching out, it's not the first. SM Entertainment, a Hallyu pioneer, started diversifying its business 2 years ago. It acquired travel agency BTNI, offering music fans special concert tours in Korea. And last year, SM collaborated with publisher Design House to release the lifestyle magazine The Celebrity, printing an average of 80,000 copies a month.
As these SM and YG are entering these businesses, they could probably see some synergy when they utilize their artists in those areas. And as from customer standpoint, if they get more touch points,
Market watchers say it's important for them to keep their capital flowing, as it's too early to call these ventures a success. To promote their new businesses, it's also vital to keep the K-pop boom going.
In addition to reaching out to other industries, it's important that they stick to their original source of profit, producing good music to expand their fan base worldwide.
If YG and SM's new business ventures enjoy the same success that K-pop has, it'll not only provide a new source for profits, it'll also give a boost to a new kind of Korean wave. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
And a good Monday morning to you all as we kick things off in women's golf, where the Korean Golf Stars faced off against the Japanese Golf Stars in a two-day tournament starting on Saturday. And on Sunday, they cruised through for their 7th win. And of course, Koreans made sure they won the tournament quickly as they started off the second round of the tournament, winning the first 6 matches before losing 1, as Kim Hyo-ju starts it all off with an amazing come-from-behind victory in the 18th hole. Now, Korea will win their 12th annual event, 25-11, and now have a record of 7 wins, 2 draws, and 3 losses so far. And now shifting over to speed skating this time, where despite her knee not being 100%, Lee Sang-hwa continues her gold rush, winning the 500-meter gold twice during the 3rd stage of the 2014-2015 ISU Speed Skating World Cup in Berlin, coming in at a final time of 37.87 seconds and 37.96 seconds, respectively. And now with them moving on, the baseball season might long be over, but there was baseball to be played on Sunday afternoon when former Samsung Lions legend Yang Jun-hyuk held his annual Hope Plus charity baseball game. And now with all the proceeds going to youth baseball here in the nation, 60 active and former ball players, including several celebrities, were on hand at the Mokdong Stadium on Sunday as Team Lee Jong-bum took on Team Yang Jun-hyuk. And after an entertaining back-and-forth game, Team Lee Jong-bum wins 15-13 for their 2nd straight win, as MLB hopeful Kim Kwang-hyun of the SK Wyverns won the MVP honors. Meanwhile, the Kia Tigers fans got the good news over the weekend that Philip Humber, who threw a perfect game back in 2012 for the Chicago White Sox, signed with the team. But in even better news, well, Yang Yeon-jung is staying for another year. Now, after the Kia Tigers declined the posting fee made for Yang Yeon-jung, the lefty expressed his desire to test out the Japanese market as well. However, after meeting with the team officials, the two sides have agreed to stay put, as Yang Yeon-jung will stay with the Kia Tigers for at least another year. Yang will, of course, be eligible for free agency after the 2015 season. Now, finishing things off in football, now during the gold medal match between South and North Korea in the Asian Games men's football tournament, the South won on a last-second goal from Im Chang-woo. That didn't sit well for a couple of people on the match, and suspensions were handed down months after that match. Now, North Korean head coach Yoon Jung-soo, who argued aggressively with the referee shortly after the goal, has been given a 1-year suspension from football, while North Korean midfielder Kim Il-young, who threw a water bottle at an official, received a 6-month ban from the sport. Meanwhile, head coach Yoon, who is set to coach the 2016 Summer Games team, will not be able to coach the team anymore. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. Well, as we can see, early morning snow clouds have all moved away from the peninsula and it's much brighter outside. And the whole nation can expect to bask under clear blue skies throughout the day, sending temperatures to relatively mild side. Morning lows are about 4 degrees higher than yesterday. Then the afternoon temperatures will finally reach above the freezing mark here in the capital, as the daytime high will hike up to 3, while Daegu and Gwangju peak at 7 and 8, and Busan will top out at 9 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju will be getting up to 10, while Daejeon and Dokdo see highs of 4 and 5 respectively. Now we'll get a break from the severe cold snap for our next couple of days, but as we head into the end of the week, things will get icy cold again, so please beware. But also that the sidewalks are coated with snow and the roads are wet with some possible slick spots, so be extra careful outside today. That's all from me at this hour. Back to you, Mark, in the studio.
Well, thank you very much for the weather as always, Jian. And that's all we have for now. We'll be back again with our next newscast at noon Korea time. Until then, goodbye.